It is a unique economic transformation from Celtic tiger to lame duck. And for Ireland, the pain is far from over. This year, the country's budget deficit will be equivalent to almost a third of national economic output. The Dublin government is struggling to convince the money markets and the EU that it can avoid financial collapse. My guest today is Ireland's Energy and Communications Minister, Eamon Ryan. What will it take to save the Irish economy? Eamon Ryan in Dublin, welcome to Hard Talk.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Stephen.
What is it like sitting in a cabinet that is wrestling with arguably the worst budget deficit in the industrialised world?
It's difficult, but I have a strong sense that we can do it, and that our job in government and in politics is to get the country through it and get on with it. And we've been dealing with them. I suppose this broke 2 years ago with the international banking crisis, and we had our own very domestic version of that, which we've had to deal with. We've done what we said we'd do at each stage along the way here. We've got further work to do, but it is doable. This country will get out of this economic difficulty. It's a fundamentally strong country. It's a fundamentally strong political system, and you work within it then to get the country through it and do what we have to do.
Well, we'll work through those concepts of both Ireland being fundamentally strong and fundamentally fair. Let's start with the strength bit of it. How can you tell me the country is strong when, as I just alluded to in the opening, your budget deficit for this year does represent pretty much 1/3 of GDP, national income? That is extraordinary. It's unheard of.
It is, but that's coming from the property bubble. We had a common garden, very bad, very damaging property bubble. But that very high cost this year, a very high government GDP debt ratio, is because of the consequences of that. But that's a one-off. I mean, that's something we do have to learn from. We have to make sure it doesn't happen again in terms of such a property bubble. But the underlying strength of the economy is shown, I believe, from the fact that we're actually going into a balance of payments surplus. There's actually more money, even with all the debt payments we have, both in the private and the government sector. We're actually coming into a cash positive position for the whole country.
Yeah, but I can't let you slide over the very real fact that bailing out the banks, nationalising all of that bad debt, has brought the economy to its knees. I just wonder whether the 50 billion euros or so that the government has had to take on in terms of these toxic debts, whether that does not...
There's a legacy from a property bubble that built up over 5 or 10 years that did us no good. I mean, it was actually socially damaging as well as anything else. And one of the benefits coming from, or one of the outcomes we have, is at least now we've got a property market that is saner, that makes it easier for people to actually get rental, get a property. Yes, there's a huge legacy issue in the banking and so on, but we can manage that.
Well, you don't actually know, though, do you? Because you don't really know the final extent of the horror that is going to come with taking on all of this bad debt from Anglo-Irish and all the other banks.
I disagree. We do know. Well, one of the reasons we do, I suppose, is we adopted a mechanism which was honest and which was difficult, but which did get to the real facts in terms of what the extent of the losses were. We went into our banks with an independent agency and went through loan by loan, property by property, and tried to get a real sense as what was the real value of those loans. Now, we've discounted them down very hard. We've cut more than 50% off what we see as the real value of those loans. That left a difficulty in our banks in that they were, they needed further capital. But one of the benefits from it is, by being such a thorough, honest, hard, rigorous process, is we now know the scale of the problem. And I believe, as the new head of our central bank says, as hard as that legacy is, it's one we can manage.
Nouriel Roubini, one of the leading economists on Wall Street, who's become known as one of the gurus of economics over the period of financial meltdown, he looks at the Irish and indeed Portuguese, Greek and other weaker economies in Europe, and he says it's by no means clear that you're out of the woods, and he says that debt restructuring may well be necessary, which in essence means you'd have to go cap in hand either to the European Union or the IMF and ask for a bailout. Is that going to happen?
I don't think it will, and I think I've read Mr. Rubini over the last 2 or 3 years, and I think a lot of his analysis has been proven to be true, but I believe Ireland actually won't have to avail of such facilities. We will be able to get out of it, that for a number of different reasons. Firstly, we started from a very low debt position, that we actually, because we had a very successful economy for 10 years, hampered by the property bubble, but the underlying economy grew quite significantly. We went into this crisis with a very low level of government debt. We also had a very high level of cash. We put aside about 25 billion euros into a pension reserve fund for a rainy day, which again, it maybe doesn't show up in some of the international analysis.
Sure, but this isn't just a rainy day. This is a perfect storm, and I appreciate your confidence, and I sense it in your body language. But then I juxtapose that with the facts that the government, your government that you sit in, said to the Irish people that, you know, this coming budget we're going to have to save 3 billion euros, either by raising taxes or by cutting spending, even though we've cut it a lot already. It now turns out that 3 billion euros isn't going to get anywhere close. The government's message in the last couple of days is it'll be about 5 billion euros. So your message keeps shifting.
Well, just to look back, those facts I was mentioning are real. That 25 billion in the pension reserve fund is real money, and I mentioned that because it is an important element in terms of asking the question, can we manage the hit that we had in the banks, which was horrible, but which I believe we can manage. In terms of a larger cut in next year's budget, we'll have to wait and see what the actual figure it is. It isn't set, but it's true. Some of the projections we had for growth next year have been scaled downwards, and in scaling that down, that then puts a higher need on you to raise or to make further cuts or to raise further taxes. Now, we will do that. One of the strengths, as I said, of the Irish political system is our main political parties have come together and each collectively said, yes, we're going to achieve that 3% target by 2014. And
let's be clear about this, that is the target set by the EU Commission. They have certain rules that govern the Eurozone, and they have reminded Ireland that you must get down to that 3% deficit as a proportion of GDP by 2014. But you know as well as I do, there are serious economists in Ireland, and there are some politicians who've broken with what you call a consensus and say that, given where Ireland is today, is simply crazy.
Well, you'll always get different views. I mean, economics is a science where you're always going to get different views as to what is possible. But what I'm saying is the political system, which will have to make the call on what we do in our budgets, has collectively, in terms of any makeup of the future government as well as this existing government, going to meet that target, going to get our budget figures down. And that gives me real strength and confidence, yes, that we can do this and we will do it. And as I said,
it's a shame the credit rating agencies don't have the same confidence. Moody's just the other day said that it is contemplating cutting your debt rating again. And of course, every time they do that, it gets more expensive for Ireland to borrow money, and the problem you've got gets ever greater.
Yeah, no, I think, listen, we've been caught, as you say, in a perfect storm. We were coming out of this quite well in the earlier part of this year, in terms of we were starting to see very strong export growth, starting to see spending coming back. That wasn't helped over the summer with the wider concern about European debt issues. And indeed, yes, our banking system, the problem we had were the figures when we went in and looked at every loan were worse than we'd originally hoped. But we were at least honest in that, and we're open with that and actually set out what the figures were. We've only closed that book about a week ago now. And I think it's not surprising in that uncertainty and given the wider environment that people were asking questions. But I believe what they'll see, firstly in what we've done in the banking system, but also what we will commit to and start doing and keep doing in the budgetary side, is a certain degree of certainty. And with that, you'll see our debt spreads coming down again and us managing our way through it. And ultimately, I think what the markets are looking for, trying to get a sense of, is does this political system have the ability to do that? And even in the Dáil in the last week in our national parliament, that increased sense of, yeah, we're going to do it because it's in the national interest, it's in our country's interest to manage this ourselves. We will do that. And our economy is actually, as I said, starting to turn anyway, in terms of we're starting to have a balance payment surplus that helps us get there.
Yeah, you say on your blog, Mr. Ryan, you say, I will do whatever I can to make sure our recovery plans are fair. Let's think about that word fair. I mean, what we've seen in your government's various emergency budget packages already are public sector pay cuts of up to 15%. We've seen child benefits slashed. We've seen unemployment benefits slashed. We've seen unemployment already rise to well over 13%. You're now talking about another huge swathe of public spending cuts. That is, the public, the Irish people, are bearing the brunt of all of this. And is that fair, given who caused the crisis? I'm thinking of the bankers and the property developers.
Oh, listen, we'd all love to see the bankers paying for it all in their own way, but that's not a realistic solution. Yes, we have had and we will have further changes in our banking system, and so the people see that bankers don't just get away with it, having some of the mistakes they've made. But one of the things we've done in government in the last 2 years in response to the crisis is we changed our tax system, first of all, to raise further revenues, particularly from those who are better off. Our independent economic research agency said that there was more done in the last 2 years in terms of progressive taxation change than had been done in the previous 20. So our actual first response was to try and do this in a fair way. But we needed to do more.
Well, hang on, I want to stick with this idea of fairness. For example, you know, some of the biggest businessmen in Ireland, the property developers, the guys who were at the heart of the problem that brought down your economy. I'm thinking, for example, of Sean Quinn. He's believed to have debts of something to the tune of 2.8 billion. As I understand it, Anglo-Irish Bank, which of course now is completely nationalised, owned by the government, has written off 2.3 billion euros of Sean Quinn's debt. And you're telling me that the way you're handling this is entirely fair?
No, listen, our banks are going to pursue people who owe money such as that to the maximum extent possible. And no person will get any special treatment or will be left out. So we have to
Well, I've
pursue
been
people
watching
and
what's
manage
been
those
happening
debts.
in terms of not just Sean Quinn, but a whole host of property developers, businessmen, and the guys who ran the banks. I've been trying to find any sense that they've been punished, that any of them have actually really suffered, that they're no longer the rich men they used to be. I find no evidence of that at all.
Well, one of the strengths of our country is we have a proper constitutional legal system as well as a strong political system, and there's a separation there that's valid and right. And yes, the courts and the legal system takes its course of actions in terms of if someone's done something wrong or someone is pursued in terms of debts they owe. That's not the job of the political system, but our judicial system will do that and won't treat anyone more favourably than anyone else. But the broader response and the fundamental difficulty we had, as well as those banking issues, is that our construction industry built up, it was too large. And as that fell away because of this property bubble bursting, we had a structural gap. Now, how we address that is what we need to get right and make sure it's fair. And what I was saying to you there is the nature of the tax changes that we put in, where we did tax those with wealthier income first, as a first response. Secondly, in terms of the major responses we did, yes, we brought down public sector pay, an average, as you say, of about 14%. But that, in my mind, was the right thing to do because we needed to get our spending back in line with what we could afford.
Yeah, but let's level, I would like you to level with the Irish people now. You've said that what you've done so far is nowhere near enough. In fact, the amount you need to cut now is going up, not down. So be level with the Irish people and tell them how it's going to hit them in the future in terms of income tax, in terms of slashing services and public sector pay even more. How far do you go?
Well, that's something we have to decide in the next 2 weeks, and that's not final as yet. We said we'd get to the Commission by middle November. A 4-year plan will set out some of those figures. So the political system in Ireland is actually coming together, sharing views on that, and that'll be set out in a plan which goes to Brussels. And yes, there will be, we have further adjustments to make, both in raising tax and in cutting spending. But that ultimately is in our interest to do as fairly and as effective as we can to make sure that our debt costs, as you say, come down, and that we can actually manage our affairs in an orderly fashion. As an independent sovereign state, which actually has a long record in running, one of the oldest democracies in Europe, we're well able to do that.
Mr. Ryan, it's probably time to remind everybody watching this that you represent the Green Party. You're a member of the coalition. And I just wonder whether you think, in retrospect, going back to 2007, the decision of your party to go into government with Fianna Fáil, the long-time ruling party in Ireland, do you think that was the right decision to make, given that you now are propping up the party and many of the individual people who got Ireland, politically speaking, got Ireland into this mess, and you are now propping them up as they promised the Irish people that somehow they'll pull them out of this mess?
Well, firstly, we were faced in 2007 with the results of an election where the Irish people had given Fianna Fáil the numbers to form a government. And we had to decide, would we join that government to try and steer this country in a greener direction. I'm glad that we did that, because I think we have made a significant difference in actually setting Ireland into the future on that greener course, which is the right for our country.
You see, your own leader, it's worth remembering, your own leader at the time decided that it was absolutely wrong to go into government with Fianna Fáil. He called it an unbelievably bad decision and walked away from the leadership. He's looking more wise by the minute, wouldn't you say?
Well, I work with Trevor every day, and I have over the last 3 years. We're a very well-organised and very collective party, not only at a parliamentary party, but with our members as well, who we've gone back to on a number of occasions as we've been in government and said, this is what we're doing, are we agreed on it? And 85% of our members saying yes. And I think recognising that this is not easy times. Politics it'd be much easier to be in government in a much easier time when everything's rosy. But actually the job in government is to actually deal with whatever is actually coming to you and managing it in the best interests of the people of the country.
Well,
I just finished the point.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the interest every time a politician comes into a difficult situation, which wasn't their making. Like the Green Party was actually was worried about that property bubble for a long time in advance of other parties.
Yeah, and you know who wasn't listening to you? It was people in Fianna Fáil, the people that you now are propping up.
Indeed, but if we were just to throw up our hands saying this is too difficult, we can't do it, that would not be serving the Irish people.
Well, you say, you quote the figure, 80% or more of your own members believe you're doing the right thing. Let me quote you some other numbers. 83% of the Irish people are utterly dissatisfied with this government. 61% want Brian Cowen, the Prime Minister, to resign immediately. And your support, Green Party support at this moment in Ireland, according to the latest polls, stands at 2%, which, as I understand the margin of error, could mean you're actually down at 0. That's what the public make of your decision to prop up this government.
Listen, it's not an easy or proper time in government, and yes, opinion polls, you keep an eye on them, and it is an important part of politics, but you don't actually work in government just on the basis of opinion polls. You do what you think is right, and I am absolutely convinced that the measures we've taken in the last 2 years, while difficult, were the right measures, and they will in the long run get this country out of its economic difficulties much more quickly than if we just, as I said, did nothing. I grew up in Ireland in the 80s when we had another difficult economic time and we had a lot of emigration. I saw then governments which weren't able to make some of the hard calls, and the process of the contraction went on longer. I think the people of Ireland, and certainly people of my age group in Ireland, have learned from that experience, and actually while it's not easy or not popular in government, it's better to actually address the issues and actually show some political leadership by actually going out and doing what you think is the right thing, rather than, as I said, just throwing up our hands and say this is too difficult, I can't do it.
I take your point.
We can do it.
I take your point, Mr. Ryan. None of this is easy. Nobody would say it's easy, but seems to me the Green Party message to the electorate was that you would, if you went into government, make sure that you changed government, changed the political culture, changed the economic mentality to a certain extent in Ireland. I just wonder whether, for all of your decision to go into government with Fianna Fáil, you've got any evidence you've done that? I mean, just looking at Brian Lenihan, the finance minister, who has called the bankers' behaviour over the last 2 or 3 years truly shocking, but he's also said, look, I haven't renounced for 1 second my free market, liberal economic ideas. I believe that the sort of economics that got us where we were, a Celtic tiger, can do it again. He hasn't changed his mind at all. So what impact have you and your Green colleagues had on this government?
Well, one of the impacts, just taking my own area in energy, we've doubled our amount of renewable energy, and we're heading to a 40% green electricity in this country that will protect this people of this country, and actually we're going beyond that, looking to start becoming an energy exporter, and that's a long-term shift that we have actually put in place that will happen.
And it may I just interject to say you've done that partly by, in the last few weeks, imposing a 5% electricity tax to pay for more wind power, peat-generated electricity, raising the price of electricity at a time when, as we've discussed, the Irish economy is on its knees.
No, but one of the other measures that I did in government was actually intervene. We put a carbon tax on large energy companies and used that money to bring the prices down. Actually, if you look over the last 2.5 years, our electricity and energy prices have come down by something like 40% for those large companies that want to employ people here. So, no, our policies are working, and our policies actually, in the energy side particularly, are turning this country around. We're going to be one of the leading green energy companies in the world because we went into government. But I want to put out some other examples. We also actually wanted to actually undo what the basic problems that led to the property boom. So what we have done in our whole planning system, in actually fundamentally changing Irish planning towards a much more sustainable model, is again a long-term legacy of our time in government that's going to be a huge benefit to the Irish people.
If you, let me stop you for a second, because we're almost out of time. If you are so confident that the government's doing the right thing, that the Green Party is having some sort of impact upon the way the government is working, why won't the government as a whole have the confidence to allow democracy to take its course? I'm thinking about the 3 unfilled seats in the Irish lower house of Parliament, which should have been filled months and months and months ago. I believe they've been open for more than a year, but the government is thwarting the laws which would allow the by-elections to take place, quite simply because it's clearly scared it'll lose the by-elections and its majority will become wafer thin. That just seems plain undemocratic.
No, what we've said we'd do is that early in the new year we would have those by-elections, and one of the reasons
that'll be 18 months after the seats became unfilled.
Over some of them much more recently than that. But we have been very busy in the last 18 months working on a whole series of banking and other issues that needed the government's full focus. And having done that, we said, yes, we will have those by-elections. But this is a time in this country when our political system needs to be stable and strong and work our way through what is a difficult but not an impossible economic situation. We can and will manage this. And not only this government, but a future government after it. I have confidence in the Irish political system and democratic system, and in our economic system is much stronger than maybe some of the international commentary thinks. And I think that's going to surprise people as we come out of this difficult situation and start to grow again in a sustainable manner, because ultimately that's the clever way of growing in the future.
I talk about public opinion, you say polls come and they go. The simplest way of measuring whether the Irish people believe you is surely emigration. What we see now for the first time in decades is serious emigration, Irish nationals choosing to leave your country because they appear to have given up hope that you can turn the economy around. You must be very depressed by that.
Oh, well, listen, I'd want to get every single one of them back, and my whole political focus and my job in politics is to make sure that doesn't happen. I have 4 children. I don't want to see them leaving this
But it is happening. Never mind, don't want to see it happen. We know it is happening. Your own government's figures show that more than 25,000 have left this year already.
Well, one of the things that's showing is, yes, there's one of the changes that has occurred and the flexibilities that we have as a country, and it is a flexible country, is a lot of people have come into this country in recent years, a lot of people from Eastern Europe and elsewhere.
No, but I'm talking about Irish nationals. I'm not talking about maybe the East European immigrants who've come and then chosen to go home. More than 25,000 Irish citizens have left net your country this year.
Well, I think I'd be careful with your figures, so those, the actual exact figures I think aren't very clear. But even taking those figures, yes, one of the reasons why we will get through this is because we have seen in the past immigration and know what it's like and know what the effect on families. And that actually drives us to say, okay, we're going to sort this out, manage it so that our country doesn't see such immigration again. We, our country, are far richer, far better resourced, far more talented than we ever have been in the past, and a far better position to make sure that doesn't happen and stop that happening than we ever were in the past. And part of the response is just being strong politically, doing what we know we have to do, and getting on with it.
Eamon Ryan.
And do that to keep people at home.
I was going to say we must leave it there, Eamon Ryan. Thank you very much for joining us from Dublin.
Thank you, Stephen.